Cold Comforts by Matthew Ward. 1. The storm came on without warning, as they so often did. Black clouds smothered the stars and lashed Lochthara's frigid tidal waters with cold, hard rain. In the lighthouse lamp room, Ruaidhri watched from beneath grizzled brows as the dark shapes of merchantmen drove hard eastwards for the shelter of Vicairn's harbour. The city still roused a pang. Once he'd been a force for order, acclaimed by cheering crowds. Now he was naught but a memory, granted a thin pension in exchange for keeping the lighthouse lit. And lately, lit alone, since young Tam had lost his wits and given himself to the loch. But there were compensations. Back in the city, he wouldn't have slept a wink. The dead rested uneasily in Vicairn. Some lingering spirits were benevolent, some not. For a man with a past like Ruaidhri's, the latter outnumbered the former. Thus he'd accepted the keeper's station on Eilean Garag. Haunters couldn't cross the water. So far from the city's sacred strata, their wan light fast faded to naught. A soul needed a body, as much as a body needed a soul. Another turn of the lighthouse optic offered a glimpse of a sloop through the mildewed glass, too close to the jagged reefs of the southern shore.
"What's wrong with you?" demanded Ruaidhri. "Can you not see the light?"
The wind gusted, rattling the lamp room's windows in their rusting frames, and with a grinding crash, audible even over the storm, the sloop ran aground. 2. The sloop was already half gone by the time Ruaidhri reached it, its back broken and its after quarters dragged to the depths. He cursed, the cold air stinging his lungs. Not to loot. Had he been of the mind? No bodies, living or dead. Not to show for his long, aching walk. But as he turned to leave, his lantern's light touched on a thin body among the rocks. A young woman, in ragged sailor's oils, blonde and bedraggled, pale, half drowned by the looks of her. Not worth the trouble. Better to let the tide carry her out. Who'd know? High above, the optic's light pulsed, offering a glimpse of the survivor's face. Impossible, wasn't it? A trick of light and shadow, the mischief of the feathered lord, or the simple madness of an old man living too long alone. The light bathed the rocks once more. He looked again. Naught had changed, and yet everything had. Carrying the young woman back up the uneven path nearly killed him. His embittered, heavy heart, a dull double thump against his ribs with every stumble. On reaching the cottage, he hauled her upstairs to the narrow dormitory. With numbed fingers, he peeled away her oilskins and the sodden wool cloth of her outer clothes, then bundled her up in Tam's old bed, under every blanket he could find. With the last of his failing strength, he stomped down to the generator room to stoke the furnace and lay sodden clothes out to dry. Only then, exhausted, did he pour himself a dram from the chipped whiskey bottle above the hearth and settle into a chair. He fell asleep before even a drop touched his lips. 3. "Hello?" breathed a quiet voice. "Please, where am I?" Ruaidhri blinked to semblance of wakefulness. Morning's grey light showed at the shutters. The howl of the storm was gone, replaced by the fitful patter of the island's perpetual rain. The woman was sitting up in bed, blankets clutched around her. She still looked half dead. the pallor of her face stark against the collar of her filthy shirt and the dark circles beneath her eyes.
Eileen Garag, Ruri replied. Your boat ran aground. She grimaced.
Skipper thought he could outrun the storm. He's dead, isn't he? The timbre and rhythm of her voice was as familiar as her face. Neither quite matched his memories. But then they wouldn't, would they?
The loch has him now.
Let it keep him. And the rest of the crew, for that matter. Even weak, she had bite behind her words, having observed a fool and judged him accordingly. I owe you my life, do I not? Who are you?
Ruri.
A first name was safe enough. Most folk had heeded only his rank and uniform.
I'm keeper here. You?
Besetha. She broke off in a fit of coughing. Where are my clothes?
Furnace room. He cracked a smile. Awkward in a way he hadn't felt in years.
Tongue-tied, almost.
Should be dry. I'll fetch them, if you want to rise.
She shuddered, her voice thinner than before. It's warmer here. Ruri busied himself at the hearth, rousing the flame to warm yesterday's leftover porridge in its blackened pot. Just oats and water, and bitter with it. So as he ladled it into bowls, he added a pinch of precious cinnamon to hers. A large pinch, offered with a heavier hand than usual. Had she got to him that much?
Here.
Still abed and swathed in blankets, she picked at the porridge with a trembling hand. More politeness than appetite. Ruri pretended not to notice. He cleaned his bowl in short order and made for the door. Where are you bound? Asked Besetha.
He shrugged. To see if there's aught left of the wreck.
Pick it over, you mean? Again, that familiar bite. But she shrugged. Have at it. No pockets in a shroud. No pockets in a shroud. He'd only ever known one other to use that phrase.
I'll be back as soon as I may.
4. The tide had long since rushed in, and there was no reaching the wreck of the sloop, even had Ruri wanted to. But then he'd not gone down there with the expectation of finding aught. He'd wanted distance, and a cold, clear wind to scatter the cobwebs from his thoughts. Besetha had seen maybe 20 winters, and it was about that since passion had soured to an unhappy alliance, and then turned bleaker still. But he'd had no choice. She'd left him no choice. Ruri stomped back and forth, the water lapping at his boots, turning facts and figments over and over, and growing more frustrated with his lack of resolve. Far from clearing his head, the wind had filled him with nonsense, fanned old regrets to foolishness, an old man's yearning for legacy, some certainty that a life lived mattered more than the weight of coins long spent, and a claim scattered like dust on the wind. Base sentiment, unworthy of the man of renown he'd once been, and had given everything up to remain. But that man had been forgotten years ago. He had to know. 5. Ruri found Besetha collapsed in front of the dormitory hearth, fully clothed, breathing fitfully, but otherwise motionless. Frantic, his heart heavy with concern not felt in many a year, he hauled her back into Tam's bed and muttered a prayer to the feathered lord. Her left eyelid flickered. A thin moan parted her lips. Not knowing what else to do, Rory stoked the fire until the flames leapt. Becerra passed the afternoon in fitful sleep, broken by coughing fits. Rory busied himself with the mundane tasks of his day-to-day. Stoking the furnace, tending the small crop garden in the cottage's lee, and preparing a thin fish stew to cook above the dormitory fire. But he always returned to her side, anxious for improvement. As grey afternoon slid into evening, and the salt aroma of the stew began to rise, Becerra at last awoke. What happened? You'd collapsed by the fire, said Rory. I was cold, she said through chattering teeth. I'm still cold. Rory winced, for he'd kept the hearth blazing all afternoon. He was in shirt sleeves for the first time since summer. He pulled a chair to her bedside. The loch's chill is in your bones, but the supply boat's due the day after tomorrow, if the weather holds. They'll get you back to the city, get you some doctoring. He offered her a steaming bowl of stew. Until then, this will help. They ate in silence, she shivering and he apprehensive. But she did better with the stew than she had with the porridge. When they were done, Rory at last mustered the courage to speak. Your parents, are they still free of the Sovereign Deep? Becerra shook her head. I never knew my father. The feathered lord took my mother 5 years back. And that's about the time you came back to Vicairn, I'm thinking. How can you know that? He could have claimed that her accent betrayed her, or ridden it out as a guess. But there was no turning back. Your mother's name was Beatrice Darry. Becerra blinked. How can you know that? No turning back now. The way you look, the way you talk. I see you, but I see her too. 20 years ago, she was everything to me. And stayed so, years after we parted. Becerra closed her eyes. We took rooms on Malarg Street. We'd not long been settled when the black bottles broke down the door and dragged her away. Rory nodded. No one had wanted Beatrice Darry loose in Vicairn a second time, much less the city's constables. She died hard, her gagged body twitching the corpse dance in front of a jeering crowd. My heart's never been the same since. It was liquor more than grief, the doctor said. But what did they know? Did she ever tell you aught of your father? Only... Becerra spluttered through another coughing fit. Only that he was a fool for duty. And he was. He hesitated. I was. I don't know what you mean. She had a music box. Played the hunter's chase. A rueful smile touched Becerra's lips. She loved dancing to that tune. That's why I bought it. She blinked. This isn't possible.
Rory took her hand. It is a gift. These past years, I've so often beheld the seas ahead, and not of myself upon them. Everything I've done in this world has been forgotten or erased. He squeezed her fingers, with a joy he'd thought never to feel. But I look at you, and I know that a piece of me will go on. Becerra pulled her hand away. You could be wrong. There's many a way that could be so. But I feel it. Here. Rory thumped his breastbone with his fist. I have from the moment I set eyes upon you. Becerra stared at him. Through him. Her pale brow furrowed, and her lips pinched. She didn't believe him, and it hurt. I'd like to sleep now. 6. With the furnace already stoked, there was naught for Rory to do that night but take station in the lamp room and dwell on his thoughts. He'd always found a dram of whiskey an aid to introspection. 2 hours gone, 3 drams deep, and much pacing back and forth undertaken, introspection came readily. She doesn't believe you, he murmured. She knows you're holding back. Tell her. Better she hears it from you than from others. Assuming she lived. Assuming that the chill of Locthara's waters didn't carry her away to the Sovereign Deep. A prospect that hurt more than how she might look at him if she learned the truth. Better that she hears what? Said Becerra. She stood at the head of the stairs, clinging to the handrail as tightly as the blanket around her shoulders, and shivering fit to raise gooseflesh on Rory's skin. A lump thickened his throat. You should be downstairs, in the warm. He started towards her. She flinched. Tell me. I was a sergeant of constabulary when I met your mother. She offered up her rivals, and I parlayed their capture into promotion. She ruled the shadows, and the crowds cheered me every time I led a gallows march and set the nooses. Only, she started to get vicious, careless. I could no longer protect her without condemning myself. She fled the city. Then 5 years back, she returned. Let it be known that if we didn't renew our arrangement, she'd tell everyone what I'd once been to her, and she to me. Everything I'd achieved would have been struck from the record. My name cursed and forgotten. She left me no choice. He scratched at his palms, at the phantom itch from the hemp rope he'd slipped around Beatrice's neck. And I led one last gallows march. You killed her, Becerra spat. He glanced away, unable to bear the accusation in her eyes. It was my duty. Not that it had stopped the city from forgetting him. You were saving your own skin. He reached for her. Becerra, she shoved him. Get away. Balance adrift on clouds of liquor, he fell hard, chiming his head on the optics dais. Groggy, his vision blurring, he fought to rise as her departing footsteps thundered on the stairs. Reaching his feet, he heard the cottage door slam back on its hinges, followed closely by the howl of the wind and rain. Cursing himself for a fool, Rory stumbled down the stairs and without thought to oilskins and lantern hanging in the generator room, pursued her out into the night. "Basetta!" He was drenched to the bone before he'd taken a dozen steps, but he staggered on into the teeth of the wind, following the trail of muddy footprints left in her wake. His heart was a cold, heavy weight against his ribs, pounding fit to burst. But he'd no thought for aught other than the daughter, who'd beheld him with such hatred, and whose every step now brought her closer to the rock spur where Tam had given himself to the loch. "Basetta!" At last, he saw her in the optic's pulse, a thin, shivering bundle against the rain-swept night, blanket whipping around her, and a narrow spur of granite beneath her feet. She spun to face him, panic in her eyes, as she realised there was nowhere left to run. "Go away!" Rory stumbled closer, hand outstretched. "I beg you, come away from the edge." She stumbled backwards, sending a spill of soil over the edge. "I want naught to do with you." He lunged for her, more instinct than choice. Numb fingers closed around her wrist. Slick skin against slick skin. She slipped free, her scream blending with his as she plunged into the night. 7. Rory had no memory of how he reached the shore. There was only a grey blur, softened by tears and weighted down by the cold, stony lump that had once been his heart. Basetta's splayed and broken body was already cold to the touch, its fleeting warmth robbed by the wind. He'd never wept his whole grown life, too calloused over and tamped down to show even a shard of compassion. Now, tears mingled with the rain. So torn by grief that he felt fit to split in two. He gathered her up in an embrace she could no longer feel and stared out into the white-crested waters of the loch. Better that she'd never come to Eileen Garag, that he'd never known the truth. His daughter, dead by his foolishness and his sins, and no future for either of them. Through racking, sobbing breaths, he cursed the feathered lord for his cruelty. By and by, he grew aware of a cold light shaping the shadows and a pale, lambent form at his shoulder. Something not wholly in the mortal world, but not yet gone to the Southern Deep, though so pale to be closer to the latter than the former. A woman, or at least it once had been. Her fading features a portent of what Basetta's might have been, had she lived. "How does it feel to lose everything?" said Beatrice, her words a vicious sigh. Rory's gut twisted. The dead couldn't cross Loch Thara. He'd banished himself for that truth. "You can't be here." "I'll be gone soon enough. The Southern Deep is clawing at me. But I have what I came for. It took me 2 years to pry my way out of the sacred strata. Another 3 to find you. I wasn't going to let a little water get in my way after that," she sneered. "That body served me well, but it's no use to anyone now." Possession. He'd heard rumours, but never seen proof. Not until now. You did that to your own daughter. She'd always been prone to callousness, but some deeds were beyond the pale. Beatrice laughed, her form flickering. My daughter. She was a nymph of the pave, run thin by cheap liquor and disease. I squeezed out the last dregs of her soul and took the body for my own. But she did look like me, didn't she? Enough to fan the hopes of a foolish, selfish old man. To make him feel aught for someone else, if only for a moment. Maybe even revive the yearning for a legacy he'll never have. Especially if she said and did all the right things. Rory stared down at the body in his arms, knowing that she wasn't his daughter, that Beatrice's spectre had crafted their every interaction to wound him, should have brought relief. But he felt only the slow, muffled ache of his ailing heart. He wasn't even cold any longer. He was beyond that. Beyond almost everything. The tide will be coming in soon to take you away, said Beatrice. You'll leave no body, no family, no reputation. The world will forget you. Was it worth it? Rory tried to speak, but his rasping breaths were too shallow to fill the words. He let the corpse drop as the ache beneath his ribs blossomed and squeezed. As he fell into darkness, the last thing he heard was Beatrice's laughter. And that was Cold Comforts by Matthew Ward.